Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein announced today charges against 12 Russian intel officers for hacking Democrats and the Hillary Clinton campaign during the 2016 election. Well, a lot of people saying the timing is curious, given that Trump is meeting with the Russian President Vladimir Putin in Helsinki on Monday. Rosenstein also made this important clarification.
There's no allegation in this indictment that any American citizen committed a crime. There's no allegation that the conspiracy changed the vote count or affected any election result.
Not quite at collusion yet, are we? Well, let's bring in some experts to see what they think. Kim Strassel is a columnist with the Wall Street Journal. Saul Weisenberg, the attorney and former independent counsel deputy in the Clinton Whitewater probe. And Scott Bolden is a Democratic strategist and an attorney. All right, let's start with you, Scott. Your reaction to today's handing down of these indictments against Russian operatives, intel officers with GRU.
I think the string keeps rolling forward. 12 indictments to go with the other 20, and then you got 5 convictions. The whole issue here is that America and DOJ, but in particular the White House, have got to take this meddling seriously, and I think these indictments further that process along. What I worry about most, whether I'm a Democrat or Republican, is if this president doesn't accept it or doesn't take it seriously, what are our administrative agencies and our government doing to prevent this from bothering or affecting the midterms or even 2020.
Yeah, hacking.
It's a real risk.
Right. Hacking is a real problem. I mean, we had one of their top intel officials today saying that our infrastructure is highly vulnerable to hacks, which could shut down our entire power grid in this country. Really serious stuff. But bean
and
counting,
our border, too, by the way.
And our border. Bean counting indictments, however, does not, Saul Weisenberg, get us to this grand theory of collusion upon which this investigation was initially started and kicked off. But you've read more indictments than I would ever have read in my life. What did you glean from what dropped today? And do you think the timing is in any way, at the very least, curious, Saul?
Well, that's a lot of questions. Let me start with the timing being curious or suspicious. I doubt it. I don't know how long the Putin trip or summit has been planned. I've heard it was only a few weeks. So I really seriously doubt that. A couple of things, though. You talk about indictment counting, and you talk about the investigation being about collusion originally. From the beginning, the investigation was also about Russian interference. Okay, yep. Also whether they colluded with any people here, but also about Russian interference in the election. And I think this indictment goes to the heart of that. And it's real and it's serious, and it certainly buys Bob Mueller a lot of time. And he can say, hey, folks, this is what I've been doing, and it wasn't very easy to do and to put together. Now, to Scott's point, this may seem petty, but let's you talk about indictment counting and bean counting. This is not 12 indictments. It's one indictment of 12 people, okay? And that's
You're right,
we've
that
had
was
a
petty.
Perennial That was
You're right,
petty.
that was petty.
By you or by me?
By you.
But no, by you. But the other thing to remember here is that, and Scott will validate me on this, and I know you will too, Laura. You don't need much. There's no collusion whatsoever here. It's strictly a Russian operation. It's very serious. We should all be very concerned about it. However, under conspiracy law in the United States, once you have a conspiracy, it takes very little to connect a new person to that conspiracy. Still have to find them guilty beyond a reasonable doubt.
And it looks like they're trying to do that in a very circuitous way with Roger Stone. There's a lot of reporting on the Roger Stone issue, whether he knew about when these emails were going to drop, and he denies all of this and said they're trying to bankrupt him. He's very adamant about this. But, Kimberly, the Democrats were, and it's not surprising, absolutely gleeful at the Rosenstein announcement. Let's watch.
This is no ordinary criminal case. This is a criminal case that potentially implicates the president and people around him on his campaign.
Donald Trump likes to describe this as a witch hunt. Well, we just found some witches, and they were indicted.
My hope and prayer is that this president and his allies will, again, cease and desist on calling the Mueller investigation a witch hunt.
Kimberly, Mueller has racked up a lot of indictments. I mean, Manafort, some of his conduct goes back many years, predates all of this. But nevertheless, on the pure issue of trying to influence our election and hack into our systems, it does seem like Mueller is coming up with some, facts that are very important, and it looks like they could probably get some convictions. Whether or not that matters, because they're not going to get these people coming to the United States. They seem to be hot on the trail of something here.
Well, look, what was missing from all of those comments is the realization that, yes, there is this new indictment engaged in 12 people, but none of it had to do with collusion. None of it has to do with obstruction of justice from the Trump team, as Rosenstein made very clear, and as he did the last time they came out and named Russian nationals who they had charged with hacking and being engaged in our election. And I think that this is the one disingenuous aspect of the Mueller probe, which frustrates a lot of Americans out there, which is if he's spending 95% of his time looking to unravel plots of Russian infiltration here, it would be nice if he could come out and make that clear, because the press certainly doesn't want to go there. The Democrats, they still are obsessing and every day making it out to sound as though there's an imminent arrest of a Trump official coming at any moment, when in fact, even those convictions or guilty pleas or indictments that the special counsel has filed have been unrelated to any of the original accusations. We've got a couple of them on the catch-all of lying to the FBI, and one for a supposed, a wire, like money laundering fraud from a decade ago.
Well, and I also think we have to remember, even Rosenstein today said, no evidence that this changed the outcome of the election. No evidence of an American being involved here. There may be, but as of now, everyone should be careful how they describe this. Kimberly, that's well taken. The White House's comment on these indictments today, I've got to read it. Today's charges include no allegations of knowing involvement by anyone in the campaign, no allegations that the alleged hacking affected the election result. This is consistent with what we've been saying all along. Scott, another thing a friend of mine raised with me, and I hadn't thought of it, and I wish I had. Doesn't this also underscore how important it was for Hillary or anyone in government, high levels of government, not to have unsecure email servers? Remember back when we discovered that this email server had been unsecure that she was using, very unusual the way she was keeping her emails, that Peter Strzok, when this issue was raised with him about whether this could have been compromised, pretty much every expert believes the Russians probably were able to hack into her system. They're going into Podesta. They're trying to go into hers. He decided not to engage on that issue. Well, curious, if they're so worried about Russian hacking, they didn't seem all that worried about hacking into Hillary's emails.
Well, the federal government and those agencies appropriate ought to be concerned about that. If they're unsecure processes.
But this was the Secretary of State having an email server in a house or in the bathroom.
You sound like you
and then
want
the
to
Russians
blame Hillary Clinton for her
I am
email being
saying
hacked.
that if you guys are worried about Russia, Scott,
the doors open.
Why were you not worried about the Secretary of State, as smart and savvy as she was, trying to circumvent the normal course of business in government and making her communications vulnerable and everything that was in them?
I think they were, and that's why they said
she was worried about that.
I think the government,
when she was caught, she was.
There were rules. There were rules against how
she violated them all.
Absolutely, and whether she was reckless or careless or what have you, that's been said. That's been said.
Yeah, Saul, go ahead.
Well, the indictment actually appears to say, it doesn't mention her by name.
Yeah,
apparently on the very day that the president said, Russia, if you're listening, find those missing emails, they apparently later that night made an attempt to go into her server and to find them, and apparently, according to the indictment, it was unsuccessful. They have to be describing her. But if I could just speak very briefly to one of Kimberly's points, I think it's wrong to say this has nothing to do with his original charter or what he was originally supposed to be looking at. It's true.
I never said that. I didn't say it had nothing to do with it.
Okay.
I said rather that I think it would behoove him to come out and make clear that this has been one of his main focuses.
But it's in the document. It's in the directive. He said that already.
Rosenstein has already said that for him. My point is that you're right. It's a very important point. It doesn't look like they have anything close to a collusion case.
They're coming up empty on it. They're coming up empty on it, Saul.
No, they're not.
But he was supposed to also be looking. Hold on, Scott. He was supposed to also be looking at Russian interference in general, and this goes to the heart of that. And I think it's very wrong to have said to him, it's a witch hunt. Now what's he going to do? He goes and he wants to get tough with Putin and say, that, look what you've done. Look at what your people have been indicted for. You had to have known about it. What's Putin going to say? Well, this is the guy you've been attacking. You say he's running a witch hunt. So I don't think that's good.
He's never going to say that to Putin either.
So, all right, last word, Scott, and then
well,
quick.
Let's talk about real briefly collusion, right? The GOP believes that since there's no collusion, that therefore somehow the White House and Donald Trump are absolved of something. Collusion is not a crime. It's an act. It'll be in the body of the indictment. The charges, whether money laundering or something else, that'll be what the charges are. And the other important thing is that this investigation is about Russia, but it's also about whether there were Russian connections to to Donald Trump.
All right, Kimberly,
let's remember
last
that.
word.
So Mueller could have solved all this and made it a lot easier for himself. With the press out there suggesting all the time that he has been working nonstop just on the Trump campaign, that this was his sole focus, we know the Mueller campaign leaks. Their team put stuff out. They could have corrected that impression, made clear that one of their focuses was on the Russians, or the bigger focus was on that, and it wouldn't have caused the White House to then suggest that this probe was about something very different.
I mean, the PR on this has always been it's someone in the Trump campaign, it's Manafort. The PR has always, separate from the legal issues. Scott and Saul raised great points. But separate from the legal issues, the PR is always Donald Trump himself is pulling the lever, or someone else at high levels. And I think Kimberly's right about that. Great segment. Have a great weekend, guys.
Welcome back. Special counsel Robert Mueller indicting 12 Russian intelligence officers, accusing them of hacking the DNC and the Clinton campaign in order to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. This as President Trump is gearing up to meet face-to-face with Russian President Vladimir Putin tomorrow in Helsinki. Joining me right now to talk about all of the above, House Intelligence Committee Chairman Devin Nunes. Mr. Chairman, it's always a pleasure to see you.
It's great to be here live. I'm not coming from California.
I know. I'm happy.
So different.
It's great that you're on set, so thank you very much. These Russian indictments, we could have known about them earlier this year when you actually came out with your report back in March, and then the findings released to the public at the end of April. I've got the report right in front of me. Your reaction to these indictments?
Well, we knew about this a year and a half ago. Almost everything in the indictment we knew about. In March 22nd, we released our findings that you have in front of you right there. Those findings were available March 22nd. If you remember, the media mocked us.
Yes, I do remember.
They made fun of the Republicans. They said it was a whitewash. The Democrats said it was a whitewash. Nearly everything the Democrats said about our report was that it was a whitewash. Then we had to fight with the intelligence agencies and the Department of Justice so that they would not redact and they would declassify our report. That was finished in April. So this entire report that you have in front of you, including all you had to do was get to page 4, and you only had to read chapter 2, and you would have had nearly everything that's in the indictment.
Yeah, it's pretty incredible. Look at all these redactions that you can actually see on the screen.
And it's page after page of that. And actually, there's more in this report than what's in the indictment. Okay? And this is what's very frustrating. So it's great that they indicted Russians. Yes, they did bad things. I mean, they're always up to bad things. We know that. They have very sophisticated intelligence capabilities in Russia. And they're constantly attacking the United States and our allies. However, in the indictment, they leave out some really important people that they also went after. So the indictment plays like they're only going after the Democrats, when Bob Mueller and all his investigators and his lawyers know for a fact that they also targeted Republicans. Why is that not in the indictment? It makes the indictment look ridiculous.
Okay. So
I'm not saying they shouldn't be indicted.
The
I'm just saying that
we're targeting both Democrats and Republicans.
And Republicans.
Yeah.
And they know that. It's in our report. So why doesn't the Department of Justice allow this to be declassified so the American public can see this?
The other thing is that these people are never going to see justice, right? I mean, we don't have jurisdiction over these people. They're not going to come to the U.S., and so they really won't actually be held accountable.
Right. They're intelligence officers, so they're not going to be held accountable. It doesn't mean, though, that we shouldn't call out Russia for attacking conducting cyber attacks on our system.
But the timing of this, I mean, they released this right after the Peter Strzok hearing, and your point is we knew all of this a year ago. Why is now the time to make these arrests and not a year ago when you actually had the information?
Well, I have to call into question. You knew about this a year and a half ago. You for sure knew it because you got our report. So you for sure knew it by March and April of this year. And then it looks like all the Mueller team did was validate our report, indict some Russians, and leave out, I think, some very pertinent relative of evidence that the American public should see, which is, why we continue to have to fight. This report has been mocked by the media, has been mocked by the Democrats, and still is mostly redacted by the Department of Justice and the intelligence agencies.
And all of these redactions really underline a common theme, and that has been obstruction on the left. You look at that Peter Strzok hearing last week, and there was so much obstruction on the Democrat. They were trying to change the subject. They were trying to stop the questioning of what went on during the 2016 election. So how are you going to get to the information when you see you're in a catch-22 situation? Because every time you want to know why the Trump collusion investigation launched in the first place. But when you ask that question of Peter Strzok or anybody else in the FBI, they're going to say, we can't talk about it because it's an active investigation, and it is by the special counsel.
Yeah, so there's a couple of points I think that are important. So we have before July 31st of 2016, we have asked the Department of Justice for months and months and months. I've said on your show, did you run informants? How many informants did you have before the investigation was even open? How much did you pay these informants to run into Trump campaign or officials or associates? Because the Department of Justice is trying to say, and the FBI, that they didn't do anything until after July 31st. So we're still waiting on that information. I think that is really important information the American people should know. The second biggest problem we have is that the President of the United States has got to declassify this. If the President of the United States would have declassified this, if you go through page after page after page of this, okay, the Mueller indictment would look ridiculous today if this was unredacted and declassified.
Well, you know what? Because there is a big portion of the country that will say, oh, he's trying to get in the middle of an investigation, which is why I asked the president 2 weeks ago when I sat down with him in that exclusive interview with President Trump whether or not he's going to declassify these documents. Listen to this. Why don't you just direct your subordinates to get those documents over to Congress? Are you going to do it?
The one thing I want to stay uninvolved in, at least for now, I may get involved. Okay. But I've been told by so many people, don't get involved. Other people got involved, and it's not good. And they'll get the documents, and they're getting them.
Meanwhile, there's an op-ed in this weekend's Wall Street Journal, and the title is, After the Strzok Stonewall, basically saying we're obviously not going to get to the truth through the legal process. The president has got to declassify. Do you think he'll do it?
Well, I think he has to, and I think this is a great example of it. It's not just about Strzok. It's not just about the FISA. Now you have information in our report here that he should have already declassified. And I think then the American people, would have known. I mean, we basically wrote the indictment for Mueller. I mean, the House Republicans, without the support of the Democrats, wrote the indictment for the Mueller special counsel, essentially, and information that we've had for over a year. So now you have Strzok, who is stonewalling Congress, not answering questions, looks very foolish. You add on to the fact that you still have the FISA that's sitting out there that should be declassified so the American public can see it. Because what is consistent in all of this investigation for a year and a half? House Republicans come out and say something, and then we get attacked by the mainstream media, mocked by the mainstream media and the Democrats. But every time when the truth eventually comes out, we're proven right. And we will be proven right again if the majority of the FISA is declassified so the American public can make up their mind, were the counterintelligence agencies abused by the Obama administration, or were they not?
Yeah, and at this point, we've got, 25 or 26 Russians that have been indicted. The number of Russians colluding with Donald Trump, 0. 5 Americans indicted, 4 of them for lying to the FBI and Manafort for 20-year-old bank fraud. So there are reports today that the special counsel is looking to wrap this up by the end of the summer. Do you believe that?
I don't believe it. I mean, I hope that's the case, but they look way too political to me. Because every time it seems like something comes out, Strzok or before that we had when the FISA stuff came out, the special counsel always seems to be reactive to try to, I think, create narratives. And maybe that's not the case, but it sure looks like the case.
So where does your investigation stand now into the State Department and into really how this launch took place of the Trump-Russia?
We are waiting on the Department of Justice to give us that information before July 31st, which for week after week after week. They continue not to do it. They did provide a lot of documents that are aiding us in our investigation. And then we have kicked over 42 names. Strzok and Page are two of those 42
But also
names.
Glenn Simpson is on that list.
Yeah, so we kicked it to the task force from the Oversight Committee, in which Mr. Ratcliffe is on this task force. We need these people interviewed on camera as soon as possible.
Real quick, before you go, let me ask you in terms of what happens now and, you know, whether or not you think we're going to see accountability here.
I think you only see accountability if there is either a second special counsel that investigates all of this, or there's somebody that is outside of the leadership of the Department of Justice who can run a real investigation on abuse of power and other issues.
What should the president ask or speak to Putin about?
Well, the president has to be well, number one, I would say don't hand a reset button over like the Hillary Clinton did.
Yeah,
right? That's number one. Number two, what he's doing with Europe and NATO is what's needed to be done for a long time, which is one, pay your fair share, and two, we cannot allow Eastern Europe to rely on Russian gas. The Germans are building pipelines, getting Russian gas, feeding the Russian beast, right? While the Germans are only paying 1.3%. So I laugh about all these people who are saying that Trump shouldn't meet with Putin. Trump has done more on the highest issues at the most important level, pointing them out to the Europeans and the American people that you've got to stop buying gas from Russians and you have to beef up defense in Poland, Romania, and the Baltics. That's what needs to happen, and only by force, brute force, will Putin understand anything. And we should give the president the room to do that.
And you would imagine that obviously these indictments are brought up as well.
Yeah, I would guess. But you know, it's just ridiculous.
Mr. Chairman, it's really good to see you this morning.
Nice to see you in person.
Thank you so much for joining us.